to gather on this first day of the new year is inevitably to stand at the intersection of the emotions of fear and hope, to be painfully aware of all the bad things that might happen to our families, to our community, to our world, and at the same time to cling to the dreams of what a blessed future might hold for us. We read and hear about war and callousness, impending ecological disaster. But as we open a new calendar, we once again hope that this will be the year when the human race finally gets it right and learns to live as God intended us to live. As always, at the most anxious times of our lives, Jews turn to our prayer book to give us the words to express the deepest longings of our hearts. And what does the prayer book say to us this morning? What would it have us pray for to bring peace and healing to a broken and blood-stained world? People who are unfamiliar with Jewish prayer think we spend all these hours in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah asking God for things, begging God for things, because that is what they think prayer is. And they are not entirely comfortable with that because it hasn't worked for them before. When they were young, they might have prayed for a bicycle, but they didn't get a bicycle. Or if they did, they had reason to believe that it wasn't God who gave it to them. They might have prayed for a boyfriend or a girlfriend and ended up questioning not God's power, but God's taste. When they were older, they might have prayed for a favorable report from their doctor. And sometimes they got it, and sometimes they didn't. But they had trouble seeing where prayer affected the outcome. But that's really not what Jewish prayer is all about. Jewish prayer is not only about asking and begging. Jews don't really pray for so much as they pray to and with. Most of the prayers we recite today aren't meant only for God's ears. They are meant for ours. They come to remind us to be grateful. They come to teach us how to recognize God's presence in our lives. The prayer Unatana Tokef, the emotional centerpiece of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, the one that speaks of it being decided on Rosh Hashanah and confirmed on Yom Kippur, who shall live and who shall die, is not simply a prayer to God to inscribe us in the book of life. It's a lesson for us, to teach us that some things that will happen to us in the coming year are beyond our control. But prayer, charity, and a change of values can make those things hurt less. To the man who is diagnosed with a serious illness and complains, "So what good did all that going to shul on Shabbos do me?" The answer is, it should have given you the resources to cope with this turn of events and not be totally shattered by it. But there is one point in the service where we do explicitly ask for something, where we do ask God to make things different in the new year. And it's not for ourselves. We ask God to make the world different in three ways. It comes in the middle of the Amidah, towards the beginning, right after the Kedusha, the place where prayers of petition are traditionally inserted. Listen closely to what we ask for. How would we like the world to be different next year from the kind of world it was in the year just ended? Our first request is V'chen ten pachtecha al kol ma'asecha ve'yiratcha al kol ma shebarata. May all of God's creatures come to know the fear of God. Now you have to understand that in the Bible, the phrase, the fear of God, has nothing to do with being afraid. It doesn't refer to the fear of being punished or the fear of going to hell when you die. The fear of God means a sense of morality, an awareness that certain things are wrong and should not be done. At the beginning of the book of Exodus, when Pharaoh decrees that all male Israelite babies should be killed, we read that the Egyptian midwives feared God and disobeyed Pharaoh's orders. That is, they refused to do it because they knew it was wrong. So if I could change one thing about the world for this coming year, that would be it. That every human being come to recognize that certain things are wrong and should not be done. That harming people is wrong, that cheating people is wrong, that a belief system that endorses and even celebrates the murder of innocent people is a false religion. Some things are simply wrong, not just illegal, not just a matter of what kind of world would it be if everybody did that, but wrong. That's what made our first ancestors, Adam and Eve, different from the animals. They acquired a knowledge of good and evil. Do I get a second wish? My second wish would be the second paragraph of that Rosh Hashanah liturgy in the Amidah. Uchen ten kavod le'amecha, simcha le'artzecha, v'sason li'recha. May God grant honor to his people, happiness to his land, and joy to his city of Jerusalem. My second wish, one I say with a broken heart, is that Israel be a shining example to the world and a source of pride to us, rather than the pariah state that has largely become in the eyes of the world. To be an ambivalent Jew today is not to be uncertain so much as torn between conflicting certainties. I think Israel's war against Iran and its proxies was a just war. I believe that any nation in Israel's place would have reacted similarly strongly to Hamas's mass atrocities. That Israel faces an enemy willing to commit any crime, that the Israel Defense Forces is fighting under conditions that would test the moral limits of any army, that the young Israelis who have fought for months, and many for nearly 2 years, are among the most heroic, self-sacrificing Israel has produced. That Israel is subject to a relentless campaign of lies, half-truths, distortions, and convenient omissions. And that the accusation of genocide against Israel only diverts the world's focus from radical Islamism, the truly genocidal side in the conflict. But I also feel that something has gone wrong in Gaza. That 2 years of fighting the most brutal war in Israel's history has inevitably affected the standards and behavior of some parts of the IDF. That the Netanyahu government, a coalition that includes the fanatical and the inept, is disgracing the Jewish state in the eyes of the world. That there's no reasonable after-plan for Gaza been articulated. That the once marginal fanatics among the settler community are protected by government patrons as they burn, injure, and occasionally kill. And that Jews around the world face a familiar hatred hiding behind a new name. At the heart of this war lies a tension between two moral imperatives. The first is to protect innocent lives on the most complicated battlefield perhaps any army has fought. The second is to achieve and to deny terrorism the ability to hide behind innocence and thereby achieve immunity. Yet even when fighting a war without moral restraint on the part of Hamas, there are limits to what is morally permitted to the Jewish state. How in this poisoned atmosphere are we to subject Israel to a moral critique? How can we risk inadvertently reinforcing the campaign of hatred and lies against Israel? Because we have no choice. because preserving Israeli moral credibility is essential for Israel's strength, because we cannot let the haters determine the inner life of the Jewish people, because engaging in moral introspection reminds us that Zionism has won, and that even though Israel is vulnerable, we are no longer victims, most of all because Judaism demands it. This season of self-reckoning is intended not only for individual Jews, but also for the Jewish collective. Undergoing this process as a people doesn't weaken us. It provides us spiritual protection. And just as we need a language for defending ourselves against the lies and distortions of the anti-Israel crowd, we need a parallel language in which we struggle with the moral dilemmas raised by the war. Those of us who love Israel must not forfeit the moral conversation to Jews who have despaired of Israel or who openly side with Israel's enemies. After 2 years of war, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. On Gaza's hunger crisis, the Israeli government didn't set out to deliberately starve Gaza, but to deny Hamas access to the UN's food distribution system. That, I believe, was a legitimate goal. But when it became clear that Israel's counter-system of food distribution was disastrously inadequate, and that the warnings of approaching starvation might this time be true, why didn't the government change course quickly? Why did it require a world outcry and American pressure to prevent a complete catastrophe? And yet I add parenthetically, why is that when Israel's policy of limiting the distribution of food into Gaza by way of Hamas led to famine, the whole world spoke up, and the vast majority of rabbis here in America rightly condemned it as a desecration of Jewish values? But when at the same time Israeli hostages are shown digging their own graves in skeleton images reminiscent of concentration camp survivors, there is no outcry. On civilian casualties, the Israel Defense Forces doesn't deliberately kill civilians. This war, with its hundreds of miles of tunnels and thousands of booby-trapped apartments and total entwinement of civilian and terror infrastructures, has inevitably produced terrible civilian suffering. Still, has the IDF done everything it could to prevent civilians being injured while safeguarding its own soldiers? Has it perhaps tolerated a recklessness that would have been unacceptable in the past? Every war produces mistakes and some deviance, but has this war produced more instances of war crimes than Israel's previous conflicts? And is the army prepared to properly investigate? About Gaza's ruins. The ruins are a consequence of fighting an enemy that wears no uniforms, operates from hospitals and schools, and built an extensive tunnel network underground. Still, how much of the devastation has been a gratuitous act of vengeance? It is true, as Israelis often note, that the Allies in World War II weren't squeamish in their war against evil. But the Allies had a plan to rehabilitate Germany. And what is Israel's government or the world's plan for Gaza? The IDF has repeatedly made clear that its goals are saving the hostages, defeating Hamas, and ensuring a new post-war government for Gaza. Those are noble goals. Yet the government refuses to rule out the far-right vision of a Gaza free of Palestinians. Can this war still be justified if the government doesn't present a post-war political and economic blueprint for Gaza that is not based on de facto expulsion and permanent Israeli occupation? Israel is at a moral crossroads. The Israeli journalist Yossi Klein Halevi said, they need to hold themselves accountable. Even as Israel is taunted with lies, our self-reckoning can no longer be avoided. Uvchen ten kavod la'amecha. May your people be treated honorably in the coming year. May all the world come to see Israel as Israelis see it, a beleaguered people yearning for peace, but compelled by its enemies to spend its resources on defense. Israel is not a perfect society, but it is an honorable one, at least as much as our country is. And Judaism is an honorable religion. And it is simply wrong for the Jewish people and the Jewish state to be the victims of defamation as we were in the year just ended. May the new year see that change. There is still one more line in the prayer that we have been discussing. Virtually the only asking prayer in the whole lengthy Rosh Hashanah service. It reads, Uchen tzadikim yeru v'yismachu v'chasidim yiranenu. In this coming year, may the righteous have reason to rejoice and the pious have cause for happiness. Or as I would paraphrase it, may this world become a world in which good people will feel at home, a world that will give them and will give God reasons to say, this is my kind of place. When we read about the gunmen who kill innocent people in our city and our country, we have to acknowledge that all the kindness and all the comfort and all the prayers of those who care about the victims do not begin to balance out the terrible void left by one person's cruelty. It helps, but it doesn't make up for it. It won't ever really be the world we yearn for. It won't really ever be the world God yearns for until the cruelty disappears entirely and the world becomes a world full of kind people. If that really is our wish, if that is really our prayer for the new year, maybe the place to start is by inculcating kindness in ourselves and to educate for kindness as the chief currency of success. Standing as we are at the intersection of hope and fear, buffeted on one side by the predictions of what might happen, grace on the other by the prayer book's vision of a possible world, we pray. We pray that God open the eyes of every living man and woman to the truth that some things are wrong and should not be done. We pray that God's promise to Abraham be fulfilled, that all the nations of the world come to realize how much they are blessed by the children of Abraham, by the faith of Abraham, and by the land God promised to Abraham and his descendants. We pray that this coming year will give good people everywhere reasons to rejoice, that the world will echo with the laughter of children, the rejoicing of happy families, and the blessing of the Creator of the world, who looks down on his creation, and in the words of the old Jewish lady, speaking to God on Rosh Hashanah, saying, God, this year may you have nachas from your children. Shana Tova Tikatevu, may you all be inscribed for a good year to come.